Hi, and welcome to the Mid-Level Exceptional Sport Business Podcast. My name is Joe Easy, and I am your host. I'm here with Dr. Lane Wakefield. He is the director of Baylor's S3 program. For those who are not familiar, that is the Center for Sports Strategy and Sales. Thank you for joining me here this morning for me, afternoon for you, Lane.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Well, let's jump right into things. I usually like to let my guests tell their own story. You're a better expert on yourself than I am. So walk us through a little bit more about your backstory, your background, your career to this point.
Yeah, you bet. First, again, thanks for letting me join you. My backstory starts on a golf course on the number 4 hole in Oxford, Mississippi, where I sold golf balls for a few years with my brother. We'd go find them in the woods and categorize them and put them on our stand. Our experienced golf ball business ran for a few years. We even let our little sister join us every now and then to make a few bucks. I ended up making quite a bit of money out of that, at least for kids, enough to where my parents didn't let me keep it. And that's when I knew I would sell and continue to sell in different jobs growing up. Sold coming out of college for Spurs Sports and Entertainment. After a couple of summers interning, started there full time with their WNBA team, who's now in Las Vegas, the Aces, hopefully bringing home a title here pretty soon. And I went from there, thought I'd be there forever, and ended up having a mental health breakdown, which ended up starting over the whole career clock process, however you want to think about it. As I started over, went back to school, but like all things, at least in my life, as a Christian, have a purpose, have a meaning. And so I didn't know what that was at the time, but it ended up being a professor and helping students go on the same path that I was on years ago, to work in sports and to sell. And then I get to add in, some encouragement and messages of kind of hope. And, no matter what happens along their path, it may not be what they expected it to be. And if it is, great. But if not, that doesn't mean all is lost. So now I get to do that every day with our students here at Baylor and through other programs we do as offshoots.
Awesome. So we're going to dive into your passion surrounding mental health in a little bit. But before we get to that, I want you to talk a little more about S3. It's something that I've had a chance to be involved with for several years, but I know there are a lot of folks who are listening who may not be familiar with S3. Can you talk a little bit about your program there at Baylor and what makes it different from some of the other sport management programs that are all over the country?
Sure. So the Baylor S3 program is the only program focused on revenue generation in the business of sports. And focused meaning our classes are only on those subjects. So you have to be a sales or analytics track in our program. Just being in the business school separates us from most of the other programs. Being within the business school, again, focused just on sales or analytics for the purpose of preparing students for where there are the most jobs in pro and college sports or along those paths. So we create coursework experiences through our internship program, or preparing for other people's internships, but a program that we have that prepares them along the way. And they are interacting with us through our S3 club, starting as a freshman all the way through their senior year. So we take trips to go visit teams each year with them on top of the classes and experiences they have with internships, culminating with their senior trip, which is coming up this year, going to Chicago with that group. So we're unique again by being in the business school. So we're all marketing majors. And then we're hyper-focused on revenue generation. On the sales side, which is the side I lead, our students, we have Salesforce licenses for them to use. So they sell for athletics. They make calls on tickets and Bear Foundation memberships. So they get a feel for things before they intern. And hopefully after a year or two of getting their feet wet, they know, hey, this is for me or it's not.
So I'm curious now, having gone through a sport management program myself, and not being open to sales until I was a senior and having done it, how do your students typically react? Do they come into the program raring to go to get after sales, or do you still find some of that reluctance?
Oh, there's a mix for sure. Some are all over it because they've understood from earlier experiences, maybe like maybe they had a golf ball stand or something along the way that made them ready and knew that that was for them. But yeah, we have some that know it's not for them, meaning they're on the analytics track, and we've pushed them to take the sales class so they understand what the salespeople are up to, so they can help them and otherwise. So yeah, the gamut of interest level, and so we just try and help them understand what it is, and then be humbled by what it is. The first time you sell over the phone, or it's harder in a lot of ways than selling online or selling at a golf ball stand, when you control a little bit more of the communication flow.
Yeah. So as you're working with students, or whether you're working with alumni, young alumni who are staying in contact with you, what is some of your advice that you provide to the folks who reach out to you or stay in contact with you as a mentor for folks early in their career?
Sure. I mean, there are so many ways you can go with it. Most of the calls I get, the ones I'm close with, they just check in, just say, how are things going? Here's some sales I made recently. Here's some events in my life. But the other ones tend to be, hey, I'm looking to make a move. I want to work somewhere else. Do you know somebody there? Things like that. And I think the advice that often comes up on those sorts of calls are how to leave in a good place with your current employer. And so Kirk, my dad, who's executive director of the S3 program, and Chris Morales over at Genesco, they wrote a piece for LinkedIn a month or two back, just working through all of those things and giving tips on how to leave gracefully and positively. So that's typically the sort of information that we're discussing, is kind of how can you do right by your current employer and head to the next place feeling like you've done everything the right way. But that's not always the conversation, right? Sometimes it's, how do I get a promotion? What do I need to do to be seen? And we talk about what some of those things are, and it may not always be the get in first and be there last. Sometimes it's just being efficient while you're there and doing your job really well. And so I get into the weeds on ideas for that. But generally, I try to be, as a professor, the one there to be the enthusiastic encouragement whenever they're calling back to, in their minds, they think of me and other professors as the good days, the good old days when I was a college student and had less responsibility, compared to now. So and try and keep that upbeat. So glad to hear from them, because I am. And then we just kind of see where things go from there.
Awesome. So on that early career development note, one of the things that you did personally prior to starting at Baylor was starting the National Collegiate Sports Sales Championships. Tell us a little bit about what led you to start that, and really what it is.
Sure. So Eric Platt, now VP of Partnerships at the Hawks, he was part of our board at Mercer University at the time, and we were talking, and he said they'd sponsored. At the time he was VP of tickets at the Hawks, and he said, I went and sponsored a sales competition at another school in the Atlanta area, and it was really expensive. We didn't come out with a student that we could hire for the Hawks, and a great event, but it wasn't a fit for sports. You ought to run something like that for sports. And the first thing I thought, like anybody else, was like, that sounds crazy, or that sounds fun, but it's a lot of work. But just kind of stewed on it for a little bit, and after a little bit of time, I thought, hey, well, let's give it a run. And we're heading into our fourth year now, and that event is meant for, on our side, it's to reach our vision of instilling integrity in the industry. We do that through speakers on the subject, and the scoring rubric for these sales role plays has an integrity component. So we think there are other values that matter, but integrity is the one that we focus on for this event. And we feel like all the ships rise. What's the right metaphor? All the boats rise when the water's high. What am I trying to say here, Joe?
Rising tide raises all ships.
That's what I'm trying to say. So if we can do that for students from all over, and schools from all over, in some small way, kind of in a formidable time, or I can't get my words right today. As people are making big decisions in their lives, then it'll help people that are managing them down the road. And as an industry, we can be people of more integrity. And then for schools and professors and students, it's, how can I find the best job? And so kids from schools of all sizes will be at the event online in the fall, in person in February, and meeting recruiters from around the country that are looking for folks that can sell. So it's fun to see students that never thought about working for a particular team or organization, and they meet them, and maybe they're a great fit. We had a girl last year from University of New Mexico who's crushing it at the New York Mets, right? So what are the odds those people would have come together without the event. I mean, maybe, but it's nice to see us playing a small role in that process.
So I want to dig more into what you talked about with integrity, but before I do that, um, going back to what Eric said to you about the sales event he sponsored, but not being a fit for sports. Um, what is the difference in your mind between a sales event or any type of sales process or focus training on sales, and having a sports sales approach to it? Because a lot of schools will have a sales club or a even a sales class or two. But what is the difference or benefit of applying that to the sport industry?
So having that competitive aspect, I think, makes a lot of sense. Moving beyond, what you can role play in a class for a grade. Now all of a sudden you're on a Zoom call with somebody from the New York Yankees, or the Packers or the Cubs, or maybe your hometown, nearby team or college. Yeah, that's a little more pressure. So you can kind of see what people are prepared to do at that point. And it's exciting. It's many students, and maybe you too, Joe. Were you an athlete growing up?
Only in my backyard.
There you go. Well, regardless, when you and I were growing up, there weren't a lot of rankings for kids and anything. But now, any athlete, in high school or in college, all these stats that go along with them. So the students that are part of this event also appreciate it because they get the competitive rush. They can interview for jobs. They also get ranked, and so they have some idea of where they stand among others that are in the same position as them. So I think there's a draw for that. Certainly, it applies well for sports. I think for that competitive reason, it's easy for people to understand kind of this is a quality candidate based on how they perform. It's almost like being in the NCAA tournament. If you had a great year for, in the regular season, that matters. But, the stars that we hear about for years to come, like Steph Curry, we see what they can do when they're on the biggest stage against the bigger schools and teams. So it's just trying to apply that to academics. And I think there's some legs for that. We're actually just hired today, JT Rogers. He's starting with us on the 26th to lead this event and analytics event, just like it, to grow it even more.
Nice. Well, let's circle back to what you talked about with integrity as it relates to sales and sports sales. It's such an important part, and it's not just a buzzword. It's something that I hired for. It's something that I know a lot of teams hire for and look for. But it's really hard to identify. So how do you build that into your program, your process?
Sure. We read a book called Integrity by Dr. Henry Cloud. We have 2 class periods. The first week of class is juniors. That's all we talk about. The idea of integrity within our S3 values is all we talk about those first 2 class days. But throughout the semester, we have presentations on a chapter of that book that we're reading together. Our presentations through the club that meets once a month, all the questions we ask guests from different sports teams and organizations that stop in are all values-based questions. You might think a business school program would focus a lot on business questions, how to sell better, how to be better analysts, and we do that in the classroom. But we have so many meetings with others and then internally on our values, because we do think we're the best at preparing students for those jobs. But we think part of that, to be fully integrated, is also paying attention to what we're doing, outside of work, outside of the hours we're on the clock. And so through those meetings, through reading that book, through having heart-to-heart conversations at times, we instill the idea of the courage to meet the demands of reality. That's Dr. Cloud's definition. So we go deep into what that actually means, which again is something we could talk about.
I love that. That is a great way of putting it. As you were talking, I was thinking through as even the most well-prepared or the most well-intentioned person, when push comes to shove, or when given a situation or circumstance when they think nobody's looking, can very easily falter, trip, stumble. And what you do in that circumstance is a phrase for it, but it's character is dictated by what you do when nobody's looking or when you think no one's looking. And in sales, it's so easy to you come up against that so frequently, right? Conversations with customers or within the CRM system, or how authentic are you being about your product or the price point, or about what the best fit actually is for them versus what the best fit is for your commission check, right?
Mhm.
And there's so many circumstances where you know people will say, yes, I operate with integrity, but do you really?
Yeah,
I don't think you're going to ever run into somebody who says, no, I don't.
right.
But how are you measuring that within yourself? And how would you feel if you're working with somebody who operated like you do?
Yeah, those are some good litmus tests for that. Um, yeah, I think the demands of reality of that definition are the ones that might get overlooked. More courage is needed to do that, but the courage to meet the demands of reality. I think sometimes our students, before we spend a lot of time on it, don't even know what those are. Don't even
Mhm.
know what it takes to sell. Doesn't know what it takes to have the right response when a customer maybe has a budget for a product that's more expensive, but doesn't fit their needs. Right. So the demands of reality in that case are to be truthful and to be honest, to be listening in the first place, and realize your job as a seller is to be helpful or to be a servant and not someone who is after what's best for them.
Yeah.
And in my mind, that's not a seller with any integrity if they're got their needs first. Certainly you want to sell, right? But those things, as you know better than I do, fall into place as long as people are doing things the right way.
And obviously, there's the short term versus long term benefit, right? Being able to operate with integrity means you're more likely to retain a customer long term
Yeah,
versus giving that short term glory.
sure. Sell something they actually need or actually can use appropriately, and you're more likely to have them back next year than realize they got fleeced and
Yeah.
they're going to be done with it.
Lane, can you repeat the name of that book just for anybody who may have missed it?
Yeah, it's simple. It's called Integrity, and the author is Henry Cloud.
Awesome.
It's
Thank
a
you.
nice, easy read.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit here, although it may not be that much of a pivot. But this is one of the questions I like to ask everybody who comes on the podcast. What does success mean, or what does success look like to you?
Sure. Well, it starts with my values too, and for me, it's integrity, family, and faith. So success would be keeping, probably not in that order, but although having integrity does mean having faith and family as important and superseding any other obligations. So success for me is continue to be having my professional and personal life fully integrated. That starts with having things in order with my own family and my own house and my own life, and then on to what I do during the rest of the day. So if I can do those things and have faith in God throughout, realizing that without Him I'm nothing, that He created me to do things before advance before I even knew what they were. That He's got a plan, and my identity is fully found in Him. Well, then what I do after that becomes a little easier. Just knowing it's not all up to me, and there's no
Mhm.
pressure on me if I'm got the right mindset. So being
So important. Sorry, go ahead.
successful. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's so important to, we talked about this a little bit beforehand, but to just control what you can control and not worry about what you can't. And part of that is leaving what's in God's hands, and not worrying about knowing, not worrying about, but knowing and trusting that He's got a plan for whatever you're going through, and that all things work together for good. But it can be challenging
Mhm.
to live that and really live that, like we were talked about with integrity, right? Very well intentioned, say the right things, but when you're going through it, can be a lot harder to do
Oh yeah.
than it can be to say.
Yep. Israelites being stuck in the desert is no picnic, and that was where they were supposed to be. So there are times where I found myself certainly in a spot where I didn't expect to be. Felt like I wasn't heading in any direction, much less the right direction. But then you got to rest on what you know and what you've learned, what you see from God, and then even within that, it's what story can you tell about your life and what you're trying to accomplish, and the earlier you can think about that and kind of have that in place, and that helps.
Yeah. I think that's a good transition over to, you referenced this a little bit earlier, um, the mental health crisis that you had when you were in Las Vegas, correct?
I was in San Antonio,
San Antonio at that time. Okay,
Silver
sorry.
Stars. They
That's right.
became
That's
the
right. The
Aces.
Aces now, the Silver Stars at that point.
Yeah.
But that's led to you really to have a huge passion for mental health in our industry, and you've taken that and you reached out to me when I was with the Trailblazers, and you reach out to a lot of different folks with the teams that you work with in your current role, just outside of what you're doing, preparing students. Um, is that something, is mental health something that you see as a bigger issue in our industry or over others?
Yeah, I don't know if I compare it as much to others because I don't have as much experience, but my gut is it is. But yeah, couldn't know for sure. But from what I do know, and again, you probably know even better than me, Joe, but it seems like those on the sports side, when I talk to plenty of managers, that want to recruit our kids and that are part of the sales championship, and you run into some, as you well know, that are really interested in treating salespeople like they're basketball players or football players, and they've got to be sold out. And you do have to be sold out to a degree, but what balance is there? What care is there for the individual, as a person? So I think maybe in sports, it could be that mentality of kind of the athletic win at all cost mindset leaks into the business side at times. I think it's probably gotten better or is getting better, but yeah, I would imagine that's easy for a manager to apply that mindset compared to maybe some other industries. And our industry, sports industry, is known for that. Right?
Mm.
Historically, the sellers were the ex-athletes that couldn't play anymore, and so that was there, and that's why some of the things are still set up the same way they are now in terms of, I suppose, inside sales programs.
I think part of the challenge too that has plagued our industry that leans into this a little bit is that we're kind of known for, this is how it was when I was coming up, so that's
Yeah,
how you're going to do it.
right.
And if you came up with a team that worked their reps 60 hours a week, then that's going to be the expectation that you put on your staff. And
Yeah,
if you weren't getting paid for all those hours, it didn't matter. You need to be at every game. It doesn't matter. Whatever the expectation is that you went through, that's the
yeah.
expectation you're going to drive home with your people.
If you don't like
And
it, too bad.
that's sports. I've got a list of 120 people who want your job. So again, not a particularly healthy way to encourage and motivate a team.
That's right. And I think people are finding out that the best salespeople, for example, aren't the ones that are willing to put up with those kind of hours and that kind of treatment. So yes, you might be able to find 120 people ready to rock and roll, but are they the best ones? I think teams are finding out it's not the case, that you
Right.
can actually attract the best talent by offering them the best opportunity. So I
Mhm.
think that tide is shifting a little bit.
So what, and for our audience, we've had this conversation before. Um, what are the pieces of advice that you provide people with, whether it's from your experience, the research you've done, or what you've learned to protect and value their own mental health?
Sure. Yeah, I've got lots of thoughts on that, and thanks for asking me about it. I think one of the things that I try and make clear, and Eric Cussin and his Same Here program makes it really clear too, and is that it's a 5 and 5 issue. It's something that we all deal with. There's a stat that goes around often that 1 in 5 people experience depression, or 1 in 5 people, have a mental illness in the course of a year. While that may be true, they're in a different way. Everybody has mental health. It's on a spectrum or on a range, on a scale. So how well you're doing one day or the other, it may not be that you have a diagnosable disorder, but it might be that you're having trouble that day, and there's some things you can do to help yourself. Now, if things go bad for long enough, then yeah, you might find yourself with something diagnosable. I was in that case, one of those people. And again, that's no shame at all either. I think what I've learned over the years, or one thing of many, is that the factors that lead to mental illness, if you want to call it that, or poor mental health, on that scale, are some things that are out of my control, like my biology. You might be able to control your environment to some degree, but you can't always do that either. your psychology, how you operate, how you process information. Some of that you didn't have a whole lot to say about it. So those things can kind of work for or against you without your much of an input until you learn about it and realize, hey, there's things I could be doing to maintain my mental health, just like I can do some things to maintain my physical health. Right, there are some activities and exercises and practices that I can do to have stronger muscles and have a stronger mind. So, that's some of the advice is, how can I go find, if I were somebody who never thought about my mental health beyond a presentation you might hear from somebody like me, it's that it pertains to me, at least to the degree that I care about my own well-being. And so is there somebody out there that knows better than I do? Where's the expert there? Who can I check up with, like I do for my annual physical? Who's somebody I can check in with at least once a year, if not more often, to have some thoughts and feedback on that? If
Well, to
not,
go,
far
sorry,
more often.
don't mean to
No,
step
you're
on you.
good.
But to go back to what you were saying before about your priorities, right?
Mhm.
And how you measure success, your family being a big part of that. I know there are a lot of folks, and I'll raise my hand as being guilty of this myself, not being great about going for their regular physical, right? Not, or if they're feeling sick, I don't want to go to the doctor. I'll be fine in a couple of days.
Mhm.
Not being willing to take the time for themselves. But who else depends on you?
Right.
And who else um, is impacted by not only your physical health, but by your mental health? So if you're struggling in that area, or if you're not taking care of yourself from a mental health perspective, who else does that impact? And who else will that have a long-term impact on?
Sure. And
So
who else?
let your care for those people
Yeah.
allow you to invest that time.
100%. And then even if you're in really good shape most of the time, and I hope that's the case, but there's somebody around you that's going to struggle, and likely there's somebody in your own family. So what are you going to do to be helpful for them if you
Yeah.
don't know anything?
That's a great point as well. So we're starting to run low on time. So we're going to pivot to our final question. This is my favorite question of the podcast, the hot seat question, if you will.
Mhm.
I am going to give you one big promotion.
Okay.
You're getting promoted to president of the sport industry, president of sports. No, sorry, not just sport business, not just Baylor, not just S3, not just college sports, but the entire sport industry. And with that, you get a magic wand that allows you to make any singular change that you want. And it's not something that takes all this time. It happens immediately. Lane, what change are you making?
I want the promotion and relegation system in college football that they have, in the Euro soccer leagues. That is truthful, and I think that would be better. But the reality is probably something more, values based, and I have to think through what that is. But yeah, there are many improvements I think you or I could point out that could be made for any business in sports and as an industry. So that's a really hard one. uh, and what's actually feasible. But yeah, for fun, I'll stick with the promotion and relegation. College football and the rest of us would all appreciate conference stuff to get where it's going eventually anyway, which is those that want to make money and those that don't. Coming from the University of North Carolina's AD, that was his what he thinks is coming. I think he's probably right. Not that I know much, but from reading from other people, seems to be the case.
Well, Lane is an Oregon State University football fan. I don't know if the school that I root for would have been subject to relegation. They probably would have been, but
there's always next year. It's just like soccer; you can always come back up. So
that is the mantra of an Oregon State Beaver football fan. There's always next year.
for a lot of years for Baylor football, that was for a couple of years there, the punter was our best player.
Well, Lane, thank you so much for your time here this afternoon. Looking forward to making sure we're staying in contact. For those who are interested in getting involved in the Collegiate Sports Sales Championship, you can find information on that on the Baylor S3 website. I'll post comments, links to that on my LinkedIn page. And thank you for your time and listening, whether it's this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are. I appreciate you spending the time on this podcast. And as always, if you know anybody who is exceptional in our industry, like Lane, please send them my way. Thanks again.
Thanks, Joe.